My name is Claire, and I never thought I'd be telling this story. At 19, I was just your typical second-year college student, trying to balance classes and a social life while dealing with the occasional bout of homesickness. But everything changed with one phone call that turned my world upside down. I should probably start from the beginning. 2 years ago, when I was 17, my dad passed away suddenly. It was just Mom and me after that, living in the house Dad had worked so hard to build for us. He left us well taken care of, with savings and the house fully paid off. I thought we'd be okay, just the two of us. When I got accepted to college out of state, it was bittersweet. Mom encouraged me to go, saying Dad would have wanted me to chase my dreams. So I did, coming home only during breaks and holidays. At first, everything seemed fine. Mom and I would video chat regularly, and she seemed to be handling things well. Then, a few months ago, she dropped a bombshell during one of our calls. "Claire, honey, I've met someone," she said, her voice unusually high-pitched with excitement. "His name is Robert, and, well, we're getting married." I nearly dropped my phone. "Married? Mom, how long have you known him?" "Oh, about 3 months," she replied casually, as if she were telling me about a new hair color. "But when you know, you know." I tried to be supportive, really, I did. But something felt off about the whole situation. Still, I told myself it was good that Mom was moving on, finding happiness again. Robert moved into our house, and I tried to make peace with the fact that there was now a stranger living in Dad's space. Life went on. I focused on my studies, tried to push down the nagging feeling that something wasn't right. Then came the call that would change everything. It was a regular Tuesday afternoon. I was just finishing up my last class when my phone buzzed. The number belonged to Mrs. Peterson, our next-door neighbor who'd lived there since before I was born. "Claire, is that you?" Her voice was tense, worried. "Something strange is going on at your house. There have been people coming and going for days now. Moving furniture out, bringing new stuff in. And Claire," she paused, her voice dropping to a whisper, "I haven't seen your mother in over a week." I tried calling Mom immediately, but there was no answer. I tried again. And again. Nothing. Then, on the 5th try, the number was disconnected. That's when the panic really set in. I ran to my dorm room, threw some clothes in a bag, and headed straight to the administrative office to request emergency leave. Within an hour, I was on a train headed home, watching the landscape blur past my window, trying to convince myself that there was a reasonable explanation for all of this. The train ride felt like it lasted forever. I spent most of it trying to reach Mom, leaving voicemail after voicemail. By the time I finally made it to our street, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone. I rounded the corner, and there it was, Dad's house. The one he'd spent weekends fixing up, the one where he'd measured my height on the kitchen doorframe every year until I was 16. But something was different. There was an unfamiliar car in the driveway, and the flower beds Mom had always kept so neat were already starting to look unkempt. As I got closer, I noticed a couple standing on our front porch like they belonged there. The woman was watering what was left of Mom's petunias while the man fiddled with the porch light. "Excuse me," I called out, trying to keep my voice steady, "what are you doing at my house?" They turned to look at me, exchanging glances, before the man spoke up. "Your house? I'm sorry, but we bought this property a few days ago." He disappeared inside for a moment and came back with a folder. "Here are the documents, all signed and notarized. The seller was Sarah Mitchell. Is that your mother?" I grabbed the papers with trembling hands. There it was, in black and white, Mom's flowing signature at the bottom of a sales contract. The date stamp was just 3 days ago. "There must be some mistake," I whispered, more to myself than to them. She couldn't. The couple looked uncomfortable. The woman stepped forward, her face sympathetic. "Listen, honey, we had no idea there was any issue. The sale went through proper channels, everything was legal. Your mother didn't mention." I wasn't listening anymore. I was already dialing Mom's number again, and this time, finally, she picked up. "Mom, what the hell is going on?" my voice cracked. "There are people at our house saying they bought it. Tell me this is some kind of mistake." "Claire," her voice was cool, detached, "it's my house. The deed was in my name, and I had every right to sell it. Robert and I have decided to spend some time abroad." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Your house? Dad built that house. It was meant for all of us. Where am I supposed to go during breaks? How could you do this without even talking to me?" "Oh, sweetie," her tone was condescending now. "You're an adult now. You can take care of yourself. And your father left everything to me, not you. The will was very clear about that." My head was spinning. "What about all our stuff? Dad's things, my things?" "I sold the furniture and appliances. As for your personal belongings." She paused, and I heard the sound of papers shuffling. "I had them moved to a storage unit. I'm texting you the box number and lock code now. Everything else has been dealt with." My phone buzzed with an incoming text, the storage unit details, I assumed. I stood there on the sidewalk, staring at not our house anymore. The new owners had retreated inside, probably wanting to avoid the family drama playing out on their front lawn. The storage facility was on the outskirts of town, a maze of identical metal doors and concrete walls. When I pulled up the rolling door, I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. There was no organization, no care taken at all, just my entire life thrown together like garbage. My books were scattered across the concrete floor, some with bent pages and damaged covers. The scrapbook I'd made with Dad during my junior year of high school was lying face down in a corner, its spine cracked. No, no, no," I muttered, rushing forward to rescue a pile of photos that had been carelessly tossed into a black garbage bag. As I pulled them out, I realized some were already wrinkled and creased beyond repair. My clothes were stuffed into more garbage bags, all jumbled together, winter coats with summer dresses, clean with dirty. The teddy bear Dad had given me on my 5th birthday was squashed under a bag of shoes. When I pulled it out, one of its eyes was hanging by a thread. With trembling fingers, I pulled out my phone and called the one person I knew would understand. Grandma. The whole story came pouring out, the house, the storage unit, everything. Grandma listened quietly until I finished, then I heard her take a deep breath. "That ungrateful daughter of mine," she said, her voice tight with anger. "Claire, listen to me. I want you to come to my house right now." "But my things." "We'll handle your things. I'm calling a moving company right now to send over a mini truck. You just start gathering everything up, okay? We'll sort it all out here." 2 hours later, I was following a small rental truck down the highway to Grandma's house in the next town over. She was waiting on her front porch when we pulled up, and she wrapped me in one of her fierce hugs the moment I stepped out of my car. We spent the rest of the day trying to reach Mom. Call after call went straight to voicemail. Grandma left increasingly angry messages, but there was no response. "Don't you worry about a thing," Grandma said as we sat in her kitchen that evening, mugs of hot chocolate in front of us just like when I was little. "You can stay here whenever you need to, holidays, weekends, anytime. This is your home now." That night, lying in Grandma's guest room, I made the mistake of checking social media. There was Mom, posting pictures from some fancy resort in Europe. She and Robert were posing by a pool, cocktails in hand, looking like they didn't have a care in the world. I stared at the phone until my vision blurred with tears. Then, with quick, angry movements, I blocked her on every platform I could think of. If she could throw away our relationship as easily as she'd thrown my things into that storage unit, then I could delete her from my life just as easily. The next years passed in a blur of classes, part-time jobs, and weekend visits to Grandma's house. She became my rock, the one constant I could count on. We talked on the phone several times a week, and she never failed to ask about my classes or remind me to eat properly. I was deep into my final year of college when I got the call. It was a Tuesday morning, just like that day years ago when everything with Mom had fallen apart. But this time it was Grandma's neighbor, Mrs. Reynolds. "Claire, honey," her voice broke. "Your grandmother, she had a heart attack last night. The paramedics tried, but..." The world stopped spinning. I don't remember much about the drive to Grandma's town, just that somehow I made it there in one piece. The house looked exactly the same as it had during my last visit 2 weeks ago. The wind chimes she loved were still tinkling on the porch. Her garden gloves were still draped over the railing where she'd left them. I had to handle all the funeral arrangements. Some people asked if I was going to inform Mom, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. The thought of seeing her, of having to deal with her during this. I just couldn't. Besides, I knew how small towns worked, someone would tell her anyway. Probably already had. The funeral was beautiful, just like Grandma would have wanted. Simple but elegant, with all her favorite flowers. I stood there accepting condolences from what felt like the entire town, when a tall man in a crisp suit approached me. "Miss Claire Mitchell?" He handed me his business card. "I'm James Wilson, your grandmother's attorney. I need to speak with you about her will at your earliest convenience." I stared at the card. Shouldn't we wait for my mother? She'll probably show up soon, wanting her share. Mr. Wilson shook his head. "That won't be necessary. The will concerns only one person, you." The next day, I sat in his office, still numb from everything. The words of the will washed over me like waves. "To my beloved granddaughter, Claire Mitchell, I leave my entire estate." She also left another letter for me. My hand shook as I opened it. The paper still smelled like Grandma's perfume. "My dearest Claire," it began. "If you're reading this, it means I'm no longer there to tell you in person how proud I am of you, how much I love you. I want you to understand why I've made this decision. When your mother abandoned you for a man she barely knew, it broke my heart. I had always planned to split my estate between you and her, but watching her squander your father's hard-earned money, seeing how easily she threw away the house he built with such love. I knew I couldn't trust her with the legacy I've spent decades building. You, my sweet girl, have shown strength, resilience, and grace beyond your years. You've worked hard, stayed focused on your education, just like your father always wanted. I choose you, Claire. Not just as my heir, but as the daughter of my heart. The house and all my savings, $300,000, are yours. Use them wisely, build the life you deserve. And know that wherever I am, I'm watching over you with love and pride. All my love, Grandma." After the funeral, reality set in quickly. I still had a year of college to finish, and Grandma's house couldn't just sit empty. The property taxes and utilities would stack up, and besides, an empty house tends to attract trouble. After a lot of thought, I contacted a local realtor named Linda Barrett to handle renting it out. "I'll send you weekly updates," Linda promised as I headed back to college. "And of course, I'll call immediately if there are any issues." The first couple of months went smoothly. Linda found a nice young couple with a baby on the way. They signed a 1-year lease and moved in right away. I threw myself back into my studies, trying to focus on finals and job applications instead of the empty space Grandma had left behind. Then came the call. "Claire," Linda's voice was tense, "we've had an incident at the house. A woman showed up yesterday, causing quite a scene. She was screaming that she was the rightful owner of the house, trying to get in through the back door. The tenants were terrified, they had to call the police." I closed my eyes, already knowing. What did she look like? Middle-aged, well-dressed, but kind of disheveled? Dark hair, about 5'6". "That's my mother," I said flatly. "And she's not going to stop." I was right. Within days, my phone started blowing up with calls from unknown numbers. I ignored them all, but the voicemails piled up. "Claire, this is your mother, call me back immediately. Claire, we need to discuss the inheritance, now. You can't ignore me forever, young lady. Call me back or I'll make things very difficult for you." I blocked number after number, but she kept finding new ones to contact me from. I started having trouble sleeping, jumping every time my phone buzzed. My grades started slipping, and my professors noticed I was distracted in class. Then, exactly 1 week after the incident at the house, I was walking across campus to my morning class when I heard a familiar voice, "Claire." I froze. There she was, standing by the student center like she had every right to be there. Mom looked different, her designer clothes were gone, replaced by off-the-rack pieces that didn't quite fit right. Her hair, usually perfectly styled, was frizzing in the morning humidity. "I'll make a scene right here if I have to." "Is that what you want? Your mother screaming in front of all your classmates about how you stole her inheritance?" I looked around. People were already staring. The last thing I needed was to become campus gossip fodder. "Fine," I said through gritted teeth. "There's a cafe around the corner. 10 minutes, that's all you get." The cafe was busy with the morning rush, but Mom managed to find a table in the corner. I sat down across from her, keeping my bag on my lap, ready to leave at any moment. "Let's cut to the chase," she said, not even bothering to ask how I'd been. "I know about the inheritance. I was her daughter, her only daughter. You're just the granddaughter. Obviously, this inheritance needs to be split between us. 50-50. It's the right thing to do, and you know it. Like how you did the right thing when you sold Dad's house." The words came out sharp and bitter. "The house he built for us? The one that should have been half mine?" Her face flushed red. "That was completely different. I was the owner. Just like Grandma was the owner of her house," I cut in. "And she chose who to leave it to." "This is not the same thing at all." Mom's voice was getting louder, drawing attention from nearby tables. "I will not let you steal what's rightfully mine. I'll sue you if I have to." "Go ahead," I said, though my hands were shaking under the table. "The will is perfectly clear." She switched tactics then, her face softening into a familiar manipulative expression. "After everything I've done for you, Claire. I paid for your college education." I couldn't help it, I laughed. "You? You never worked a day in your life, Mom. You transferred money from Dad's account to pay for my tuition. Money he left for my education. How dare you?" She slammed her hand on the table, making the cups rattle. "You ungrateful little." "I'm done here," I stood up, grabbing my bag. "Don't contact me again." I pushed through the door, her stream of obscenities following me out onto the street. Several customers were recording on their phones. Great, just what I needed. Back in my dorm room, I made the mistake of checking social media. Mom had already posted a novel-length rant. I never thought my own daughter would betray me like this. She manipulated my poor mother, turned her against me, and stole what should have been mine. My own flesh and blood, conspiring behind my back. The comments section quickly turned into a battlefield. Mom's siblings and cousins jumped in, calling me names and demanding I do the right thing. But Dad's family fought back hard. "Sarah, we all remember how you abandoned Claire and ran off with that man," my Aunt Susan wrote. "Sold Claire's childhood home out from under her and jetted off to Europe. Shame on you." Some more distant relatives and family friends tried to be voice of reason. "If you're so sure you have a claim, take it to court," one commented. "Throwing accusations on Facebook isn't going to change a legal will." But Mom kept going, post after post, each one more dramatic than the last. She painted herself as the victim of a grand conspiracy between me and Grandma, conveniently leaving out how she'd treated me these past few years. After graduation, I finally returned to Grandma's house, my house now. The tenants had moved out the week before, leaving everything surprisingly well maintained. Standing in the empty living room, I could almost hear Grandma's laugh echoing off the walls. I decided to take a few months off before job hunting. The inheritance meant I could afford to breathe a little, and the house needed some work. Nothing major, just the kind of minor repairs that pile up over time, a squeaky floorboard here, a dripping faucet there. It felt good to keep my hands busy, to make the space truly mine. I was in the middle of repainting the kitchen when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, but I figured it might be one of Grandma's old neighbors coming to say hello. I wiped my paint-covered hands on my overalls and headed for the door. The moment I opened it, my stomach dropped. There stood Mom, looking nothing like the polished woman I remembered. Her hair was unwashed, her clothes wrinkled, and her mascara was running down her cheeks. "Claire," she sobbed, pushing past me into the house before I could stop her. "You have to help me. I have nowhere else to go." "What are you talking about?" I stayed by the open door, keeping my escape route clear. "Robert left me," she wailed, sinking onto Grandma's old couch. "He took everything. I'm broke, Claire. I need a place to stay, just until I get back on my feet. And maybe alone?" I stared at her in disbelief. "You've got to be kidding me." "I'm your mother," she cried. "You can't just leave me on the street." "Like you left me?" The words came out sharp and cold. "Like you abandoned me and ran off with Robert and all that money from Dad's house?" She sat up straighter, wiping her eyes. "That's different. You were an adult already. You weren't going to starve." "Right, because Grandma took me in. The same Grandma whose house you're now trying to guilt your way into. You don't understand," she was really crying now. "Robert, he forced me to sell the house. He was controlling, manipulative. He bullied me into everything. I was a victim too." I pulled out my phone, opened her social media profile, and held it up. "Really? Is that why you posted this yesterday?" There it was, a photo of her and Robert at some fancy restaurant, his arms around her as she beamed at the camera. The caption read, "Date night with my soulmate." "And this one from last week?" I swiped to another photo. "And these hundreds of others showing how bullied and miserable you've been?" Mom's face changed. The tears stopped instantly, replaced by something ugly and hard. "You little trash," she snarled, standing up. "I should have had an abortion when I had the chance. You're nothing but a greedy, ungrateful. Get out." My voice was shaking, but I held my ground. "I never want to see you again, ever. You'll regret this," she spat as she stormed past me. "You're just like your father, selfish and—" I slammed the door in her face, cutting off whatever cruel thing she was about to say next. Through the wood, I could hear her continuing to scream, but I just slid down to sit on the floor, my back against the door, and waited until she finally went away. The aftermath of Mom's visit was exactly what I expected. My phone exploded with messages from relatives I hadn't heard from in years, all of them suddenly concerned about poor Sarah and her difficult situation. Every day brought new guilt trips, new accusations. Aunt Linda called to tell me how Mom was crying herself to sleep. Cousin Rachel sent long texts about family obligations and Christian forgiveness. Uncle Tom wrote a whole email about how I was tearing the family apart. That's when I decided I'd had enough. I sat down at my computer and wrote out everything, the whole story, from the day she sold our house through her recent attempt to con her way into Grandma's house. I attached photos of the storage unit where she'd dumped my things, screenshots of her European vacation posts from right after she'd left me homeless, and finally, the coup de grace, a scanned copy of Grandma's letter. I posted it all publicly. No more hiding, no more letting Mom control the narrative. The response was immediate. Mom's relatives went silent. The guilt-tripping messages stopped. Even the ones who had been her staunchest defenders couldn't argue with Grandma's own words. That was 6 months ago. I've finished renovating the house now, nothing fancy, just making it mine while keeping the touches of Grandma that made it feel like home. I found a good job at a local marketing firm, and I'm building a life for myself. Through the family grapevine, I hear bits and pieces about Mom. She's living in the next state over, in a small apartment she can barely afford. Robert really did leave her, taking most of their money with him. She had to sell her designer clothes and jewelry, and for the first time in her life, she's working as a retail clerk, I heard. Sometimes, when I'm sitting in Grandma's garden on quiet evenings, I think about how Mom must have planned it all out in her head. She probably thought she'd spend Dad's money living the high life with Robert, knowing she had Grandma's inheritance as a backup plan. She chose to enjoy the moment, spending carelessly, never thinking about consequences. The other day, I found an old photo album in the attic. There was a picture of Mom holding me as a baby, both of us smiling at the camera. For a moment, I felt that old familiar ache, that wish that things could have been different. But then I remembered Grandma's words, sometimes the hardest thing and the right thing are the same. I closed the album and put it back in the attic. Maybe someday I'll want to look at it again, but for now, I'm focused on the future. My future. The one I'm building on my own terms, in this house filled with memories of the people who really loved me, not just when it was convenient, but always.